In 2020, Chromebook sales tripled to over 30 million units. This put them as the second most sold OS, ahead of macOS. But something changed. Now, they're dying, and it wasn't just the pandemic. These things outsold Macs in the 2010s as well, but now millions are dropping Chromebooks. What happened to the device that was supposed to replace laptops? If you don't know what a Chromebook is, it's basically Google's attempt at a lightweight laptop or tablet. But here's something that makes them different from your standard Dell or HP. Instead of running Windows, it uses Chrome OS. This means almost the entire experience is browser-based. I've used them before, and they're definitely fast and honestly pretty cool, but they feel more like a giant phone with a keyboard than a real computer. Though that's not a bad thing. They aren't trying to do heavy lifting, they boot up in seconds, and most importantly, they're significantly cheaper. For customers who don't want a huge buy-in and just want the basics, a Chromebook is a great solution. We're talking a few $100s versus $1,000 plus for a MacBook. And this price point made them the absolute perfect solution for one group in particular. Back in 2020, the world changed overnight, and schools suddenly needed screens for students to learn from home. But not everyone at school has their own computer at home. Many would just use the available ones on site, but buying full-fledged laptops was too expensive for many. The solution was Chromebooks. At about $300 each, it was perfect. Sales tripled to over 30 million units in a single year, but this had actually been Google's plan for about 10 years. Google wasn't trying to win over professional video editors or gamers. They were hunting for the classroom. As early as 2006, Google was preparing for something massive, bringing the G Suite ecosystem to schools. Gmail, Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, and of course, Google Drive. All of these became the default for students, each with their own personal school account. As far back as 2013, reports show that education made up 85% of all Chromebook sales. By 2014, Gartner was being blunt about it, stating that education was the primary market, representing over 70% of global sales. Plus, Google's G Suite with apps like Drive were becoming huge in this market. The two went hand in hand. For educators, these worked great, as you could buy them in massive volumes without breaking budget. By 2017, Google was absolutely dominating the US K-12 market, holding nearly 60% of all shipments, ahead of Microsoft and Apple. The Chromebook was becoming so powerful that it started attracting some very serious copycats. Microsoft, the undisputed king of the PC market, realized they were losing an entire generation of users to Google. They wanted a slice of the pie. So they launched Windows 10s, specifically to target schools, trying to mimic the lightweight feel. But honestly, Microsoft just couldn't keep up with Google's momentum in this specific niche. More and more schools were adopting Chromebooks and Google, which caused even more schools to adopt Google too. In fact, Microsoft's most recent attempt at a Chrome OS killer, Windows 11 SE, is already seeing support end in October 2026. As shocking as it might sound, Google, an ad company, literally beat Microsoft at shipping computers. And it gets even stranger. Chromebooks were the only thing that were actually growing, while the rest of the PC market was struggling and declining for most of the decade. Google's scale here is just massive. By 2019, 80 million educators and students were using Google Suite, 30 million of which were using Chromebooks. Fast forward a bit more, and that number jumped to 50 million students and educators globally. It even got better when Google started adding Android app support, which made the machines way more versatile. You can suddenly run mobile games and productivity apps right on your laptop. For a while, it really looked like the industry was shifting. These machines were smaller, easier to sell, and Google was swallowing up an entire segment of market that Windows and Mac had ignored for years. Plus, many of these students would naturally become Google G Suite users for life after leaving school. So, where did all of this go wrong? Despite the massive sales and the classroom dominance, there was always a fatal flaw hiding behind those lightweight screens. I'm not just talking about the fact that they feel a bit plasticky or that you can't run heavy software like Photoshop very well. Those were actually fine trade-offs for the price. The real problem was something much bigger, and part of it was with Google. By the end of 2021, the market went off a cliff. Shipments crashed by over 66% in the final quarter of that year. Gartner even blamed Chromebooks for dragging the entire global PC market down into a decline. So, what happened? It comes down to something called expiration policies. Every Chromebook comes with an expiration date. It's not that the hardware stops working, but Google eventually stops guaranteeing Chrome OS, browser, and firmware updates for that specific model. Once those updates stop, the device becomes a massive security risk. For these schools, no more updates and support is essentially the end of a Chromebook's life. Websites stop loading correctly, apps start crashing, and for a school district managing thousands of devices, an expired Chromebook is basically e-waste. And this is a huge cost when your district has tens of thousands of these things. Back in 2016, this lifespan was often only 5 years. Sounds reasonable for laptops, so what was the issue? The whole idea is essentially a browser-based cloud laptop. Google's whole pitch was automatic updates and minimal IT babysitting, but their own documentation admits that these updates depend on a bunch of different hardware providers. They have to test the software on every single specific component for every device release, and if I'm being honest, I think the business incentive here is pretty obvious. These expiration dates create a very predictable planned obsolescence. It forces schools to replace their entire fleets more often, which keeps the manufacturers and Google happy because it's more recurring revenue more often. Critics have called this what it is, and it's hard to argue with them when you see perfectly functional laptops being thrown away because the software is just no longer supported. Reports started coming out showing that these policies were forcing school districts into incredibly expensive replacement cycles. One study estimated that if Google just doubled the lifespan of these devices, it could save taxpayers nearly $2 billion. It was that, or ditch Google altogether. The pushback against Google began to snowball, and globally too. In Denmark, a whole municipality actually banned Google school tools, including Chromebooks, because of data protection concerns. It disrupted thousands of students and sparked a massive national debate about whether we should be trusting these companies with our education infrastructure in the first place. Google realized they had a PR nightmare on their hands, so they announced the newer Chromebooks would get 10 years of automatic updates, with options to extend support for older models. But while that fixed the expiration problem, it didn't fix the fact that the whole world was moving on to something else entirely different. Unlike Chromebooks, we're still growing. Over the past 8 years, we've posted 1,100 videos, though we still haven't crossed 1 million subscribers. We are close though, and I believe 2026 is the year, and if you subscribe right now, we can actually make that a reality. There's a much bigger reason why Chromebooks are disappearing from the spotlight, and it's separate from school budgets or software updates. The entire laptop market is undergoing a massive shift, and Chromebooks are getting caught in the crossfire. I've noticed this when looking at new tech lately, and I'm sure you have too. Everything is getting more expensive. PC parts, laptops, and the budget category is starting to vanish. There are two major reasons for this, and the first one is something you might see coming if you're following tech news: RAM, and the culprit, our old friend AI. Right now, the people who make RAM are obsessed with AI because that demand from data centers, or AI factories as Jensen Huang now calls them, has essentially changed their business overnight. Micron, for example, is completely exiting the consumer market purely because of AI demand. It's just so lucrative. AI companies bought RAM that doesn't exist for GPUs they don't have for data centers that aren't built for demand that isn't there. And who does that affect? Us. This has created a massive supply gap, but consumer demand is still there. Prices have gone up, and some experts are forecasting that conventional RAM prices could jump by as much as 60% in a single quarter. This is why building a PC feels like a luxury hobby right now. But for Chromebooks, this is a total disaster, because Chromebooks are incredibly price sensitive. Even if they're basically cloud laptops, they still have physical parts, including RAM. If the cost of parts goes up by $50, that's a huge percentage of a $300 laptop's price tag. To make matters worse, Google's new Chromebook Plus initiative actually requires more RAM, not less. So, right as memory is getting more expensive, Google is demanding that manufacturers put more of it into every device. The cheap laptop is becoming not so cheap anymore. But there's a second issue going on too, partly related to RAM prices, but more macro. Back in the 90s and 2000s, a 2-year-old laptop felt ancient. Technology, in particular CPU performance, was advancing so fast. MIT states that chip performance per dollar improved about 48% per year from 2000 to 2004, but that dropped to under 10% after 2008. To be clear, chips are still advancing extremely quickly, but we've long crossed the computing needs of the average consumer. So a 5-year-old laptop is usually still perfectly fine, even for intensive tasks like Photoshop. As such, people are hanging on to their devices for longer than ever, and we have real data for this too. In the 2010s, global computer sales started falling for the first time in history, not because computers became less useful, but because computers had finally surpassed what the average person needed. In other words, there was no need to replace your computer every 2 years because it became outdated. This trend has only intensified over the past decade, leading to, at least in my opinion, people preferring to invest in a more expensive computer that lasts for a long time, like Dell XPS or MacBooks. Research also shows the replacement cycle has moved from 4 years to over 5 years. Only one more year, but across millions of people, that's huge. The market is stabilizing, and now the cheap disposable model of the Chromebook doesn't make as much sense. If you're going to keep a laptop for 6 or 7 years, you're probably more likely to spend a bit more upfront for something that will actually last. I think the post-COVID era really solidified this. The good enough era of the Chromebooks is being replaced by a buy it once, buy it right mentality. And with the weird world of AI, the urge to hold onto your device just a bit longer is stronger than ever. Chromebooks were perfect because they captured an untapped market: lightweight, cheap, browser-based devices with only the essentials. They dominated their target market for this: education. In a way, Chromebooks finished their one job. The pandemic made it look like a global takeover, but it was really just one massive bulk buy. School districts bought 5 years worth of devices in a single semester, and once that was done, there was nowhere left to grow. Now, Chromebooks are getting squeezed from both sides. Parts are getting more expensive, and consumers realize a cheap plastic laptop with a short lifespan isn't a great investment anymore. Chromebooks won't disappear. They'll always have a home in classrooms, but the dream of replacing the real laptop is far gone. Dell isn't having a much better time either. They went through a huge identity crisis, trying to copy the MacBook and even completely ditching their XPS line. Check out this video to learn more, but until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.